Final Fantasy is one of the most influential video games of all time and is one of the reasons I'm able to experience this medium in the current day. The development process of the first game is well documented and has been discussed to death at this point. Thus, I will opt to spare you my rendition of regurgitating whatever information you may find on its Wikipedia page. Instead, I'm going to play through and analyze this almost 40-year-old game in order to learn about the core mechanics and systems that existed at the time. Before I begin, I would like to say that I do know that Final Fantasy is loosely based around the core rule sets for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I myself have never played AD&D, but I am aware of what the general gameplay style is, even if it comes from my sparse knowledge of the current day old-school Renaissance systems. Instead of the typical modern-day fantasy adventures, which emphasize the story of the characters, older systems were much more brutal, with combat and dungeon crawling being the main focus instead. Characters were not expected to live, with even multiple dying per player per session. These elements make the game more akin to a survival horror experience. I wish I had more knowledge about the systems that inspired this game, so I could talk more about how well of a job Final Fantasy did in adapting them, and perhaps one day I will indeed gain the ability to do so. Alas, that day is not today. One more piece of supplemental info is that the game originally came with a hyper detailed guide that assisted the players along the way. This, alongside not having any real expectations on what a video game should be, changes everything about how you interact with the medium, and of course, I will not be trying to replicate that original experience. So, for the sake of convenience, I will be playing the Pixel Remaster version of the game. My hopes are that because this is a remaster, the up-to-date content should only act as a new coat of fresh paint, in turn keeping the core gameplay systems unchanged. Since we are already deviating from the original NES version, there are a couple of issues in the remaster that mods can improve upon. The FFPR visual revamp is a big one, since it reskins most sprites, including, but not limited to, the NPCs, players, overworld, battle, enemies, and background sprites. In addition to that, the Origins Rebalancing mod includes a complete overhaul with multiple difficulties. I will be playing on the challenge difficulty, because it seems like the intended difficulty by the uploader. Sure, this changes around the numbers, but it shouldn't be able to change the core experience, especially since it's based on the Final Fantasy Origins port. Besides, from what I found, the Pixel Remaster already played around with some of the numbers in some odd ways, making the game easier than the original. So this should help get us closer to that original experience, at least in spirit. This final one isn't a direct game mod, but it is an external program that allows me to apply several overlay effects, and that is Mousemuse's Shader Glass. Shader Glass allows me to use the RetroArch shader library externally. In this case, I'm using the CRT Royal filter with some modifications to make it more visually appealing to my taste. So, while not being an issue for me, if you do have any issues with CRT filters, slight flickering, weird visual effects, or have any photosensitivity issues, you might want to either just listen to my voice or watch with a little bit of caution before proceeding ahead. I do think this effect improves the experience by quite a bit though. Pixel art and CRT filters do some wild things when combined. Of course, make sure to check out and endorse the mods down below if any of them catch your attention. Now, with all the supplemental information out of the way, it's time to begin. We are given the option to create and name our party. I appreciate being given the choice to compose my party of 4 however I desire, but I decided to go ahead and stick with the 4 default classes and randomly generate their names. This leaves us with Loris the Warrior, Morgan the Thief, Frank the White Mage, and Callie the Black Mage. The Warrior serves as our tank, the White Mage is our magical support and primary healer, and the Black Mage is the classical magical damage caster. This leaves the Thief as the only real open flex slot, with our other options being a Black Belt or a Red Mage. The Red Mages are the Jack-of-all-trades class. They're good at physical attacks and can use white and black magic. I think this will tend to make them overpowered for the majority of the game, because being limited from using high-level spells or equipment only matters once you reach that high level. Black Belts, on the other hand, seem like a pure martial class, and focus more on dealing damage rather than the balance the fighter provides. Between these options, I go ahead and just stuck with the Thief, because I think stealing mechanics are a pretty nifty utility skill. However, I didn't know, at the time, that the mechanic of stealing was not yet implemented in this first edition of the game. So this means that Thief is the weakest class in the entire game, and it's, like, not even close. We are thrust into a world shrouded in darkness. The winds have died, the seas rage, and the earth decays. However, the people believe in a prophecy, patiently awaiting its fulfillment, because when the darkness veils the world, the 4 warriors of light shall arrive. After a long journey, 4 young travelers appear, each grasping onto a crystal of light in their hands. Where did these crystals of light come from? It doesn't matter. Spawning on the map and skipping through some tutorial menus, We go ahead and enter Cornelia. We talk to the guard blocking the city gates almost immediately and are informed that the king is searching for the prophesied warriors of light. Somehow, the guard notices that we are carrying the crystals of light, I guess they emanate some sort of aura, and escorts us to the throne room. The king repeats the prophecy, and we learn that it was foretold by a person or entity named Lucan. The chancellor doubts that these crystals of light are proof, but the king does not dare deny the evidence before him. After some thought, the king tasks us with rescuing his daughter, Sarah. The Chancellor fills in the details of what has happened. We learn that Garland, a knight who has once served the king, abducted the princess and holds her captive in the Temple of Chaos. In return for saving the princess, the king will show us gratitude by repairing the northern bridge, which will allow us to travel further inland to complete our quest. We have just arrived in these foreign lands and are already tasked with saving a princess. It seems like the journey ahead of us is long indeed. I talk to all of the guards and staff, which occupy the castle, but don't learn much. We're able to talk to Her Majesty and the second princess, but they also divulge no information. This sage reveals that his ancestors were the ones that sealed away the weapons within this treasure room 400 years ago, and gave the key to the Elf King. Only he is allowed to gift it to the coming Warriors of Light. We don't know where the Elf King currently is, but now we do know we need to talk to him. We head inside the inn and encounter a room with 4 sages. Each of them only gives us a couple of lines about equipment, magic items, monsters, and other basic information that we might need about the systems at play. This is all we get, making it possibly the shortest tutorial for any turn-based JRPG in the history of ever. In the town center, we talk to this dancer who has something to say before taking a peek at our reflection in the water fountain. We're filthy and need to wash up apparently, but we are not given the option to do so I guess we will just stay as dirty hobos. This blue-haired man talks about how once he lived far east of here in the harbor city of Provoca, but in recent times it has turned into a pirate den. One of the last town sages that we haven't talked to yet stands in the corner. Discussion with him reveals that Sage Lucan, the one who prophesied the Warriors of Light, has left town searching for a crescent moon. Having now gathered enough information to guide us for the foreseeable future, I turn my attention to the current task at hand. With 400 gil to our name, I spend the first bit of it at the weapons shop and pick up a hammer for Frank, the White Mage, 2 rapiers, one for each Loris, the Fighter, and Morgan, the Thief, and finally a knife for Callie, the Black Mage. Armor is even more simple, since I don't have to decide between the mages getting a staff or metallic weapon. Loris gets a chainmail, Morgan gets leather armor, and Frank and Callie just don a simple shirt. However, traveling to the spell shops reveals much harder choices. We only have 200 gil left, and each spell costs 100 gil each. For Black Magic, we have the choice of Fire 1, Sleep 1, Focus 1, and Bolt 1. Sleep and Focus are a debuff and buff respectively, so for now, we can skip over these. Between Fire and Bolt, I decided to pick up Fire as I don't see us sailing the high seas for quite a while. It's also important to note that we have 4 spells to purchase, but we only get 3 slots. That makes each choice of spell that much more important. While we can't forget a spell, we would still have to spend the gil to buy a new one to replace it. And we won't be able to use all the spells in combat. For level 1 White Magic, we have the options of Dia 1, a holy move effective against the undead, Shield 1, which buffs one ally's defense, and Blink, which buffs only the caster's evasion. Of course, I left out the most important spell, Cure 1, which is the obvious first choice here. With nothing else to do in town, I head out into the wilderness. We're taken back to the world map. The scale here is shifted and acts as an abstraction for traveling across the world. I don't know how we ended up in Cornelia in the first place since it's a fairly isolated location, but our feet are the only method of travel available to us right now. I run around the forest surrounding Cornelia and encounter the first enemy troops in the game, a group of goblins. Being level 1, our options are limited. Everyone attacks in a nondescript manner while Callie casts Fire 1. All of our characters auto-target the next enemy even after killing them. This seems like a basic feature, but I do note that in the original NES copy of the game, if one of your characters killed an enemy, the next attack, which targeted that now dead enemy, would end up missing. I mention this because not needing to target the correct enemies to make sure you attack has a chance of even connecting in the first place makes the combat much more mindless than it was in the first game, at least initially. In the future, it gets really tedious having to auto-attack everything, which makes it more of a waste of time than, actually engaging, but that's a problem for the future. After an honest day's worth of grinding some goblins into gil, I spend 30 of that gil at the inn. With our HP and MP restored, we march towards the location of the kidnapped princess. This crazy horse is the first non-goblin enemy I encounter, but it's nothing special. Atop the crust of the earth, an ominous building rests, and we enter. I head west at the fork, and our first encounter is against a Black Widow. Not that it gets a chance to do anything. A few more steps, and we're attacked by 2 skeletons, our first undead enemies. We kill them, making them undead. With the path to the treasure room clear, I open the chest and obtain a leather cap, which I give to Callie. Our next undead enemy is a ghoul, and it's much stronger. Its basic attack hits twice, dealing 20 damage to Morgan, and leaves him paralyzed. Frank casts Cure 1. The ghoul needs no rest, and gets in 3 hits this time, bringing Morgan back down to 20 HP from his almost full 50 after being healed. After winning the battle, we walk into the treasure room. The first chest contains a potion, and the second contains a tent. However, shortly after we exit the room, a swarm of wolves ambush us. Everyone attacks, and in the aftermath, Morgan is left to only 14 HP. Frank uses the potion to bring Morgan back up, which was a good idea because a wolf brings him back down to 13 before taking another swipe to deal another 12. With just 1 hit point remaining, Morgan manages to evade the rest of the attacks and uses a potion on himself. With Morgan now able to sustain himself, the rest of the wolves go down in just a few more attacks. After all of those attacks, I decide to make my way out of the temple and head back to the inn in town to restock on supplies. Callie picks up Bolt 1 for more elemental coverage and Sleep 1 for an all-enemy debuff. Frank gets Steel 1 to attack groups of undead easily, and Shield 1 as it can raise the defense of any ally. Back at the temple, we fight through the horde and, to our surprise, or disappointment, encounter 2 different treasure rooms locked behind a mystic key. The sheer size of the dungeon and its linear sections force more steps, which in turn forces more encounters, which wastes and drains more resources. This is the primary gameplay loop and main draw of the game. We only have a certain amount of resources to not only make it through the dungeon, but to also make it back out. Our reason for entering said dungeons is of course the crystals, but we are also able to obtain weapons, equipment, and items stronger than what we have otherwise purchased through the shops. It's also thanks to these treasures that the difficulty in making it back out is reduced, making us feel stronger even though we have less resources than we initially began with. It is in this gameplay loop that the primary dungeon diving influence of AD&D shines through. Thanks to the Pixel remakes, I have the ability to quicksave. This makes trekking through the dungeon just a bit easier because if I ever mess up or go down in a battle, I can just go back to the previous floor or fight instead of restarting from outside the dungeon. Of course, you can only initiate a proper save on the world map. This helps prevent softlocks, and if you wish to challenge yourself, you can, of course, go ahead and use the save system just like it was intended on release. We enter the middle room, and Garland speaks. The king will have no choice but to exchange the kingdom for his daughter's life. Cornelia will be his. Garland turns around, now aware of her presence. He lets out a humph and says, "The king's lapdogs. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? We don't back down." Garland doesn't believe that we have what it takes to cross swords with him and declares to knock us all down. The battle begins. In turn 1, Loris, Morgan, and Frank all attack, with Callie attempting to lull Garland into a daze. In response, Garland doesn't do anything. Turn 2 is a repeat of turn 1, except Callie uses Bolt 1 because that metal armor should act as an excellent conductor. Hopefully. Luckily, the Bolt does 41 damage, which is more than Loris's 28 and Morgan's and Frank's 4 combined. However, now that we're out of spell slots, the crew resorts to a full onslaught of basic attacks. Garland brings Callie all the way down to 6 HP, but we manage to take him out before it becomes an issue. With Garland exterminated, we wake up the green-haired lady lying on the green and gray stone tiled ground. She announces herself as Sarah, the Princess of Cornelia. Now in safe hands, we escort her back to Cornelia, allowing her and the king to display their gratitude. The king thanks us and uses this trial as confirmation for why we are indeed Lucan's Warriors of Light. This is where he gives us the rest of the prophecy. When darkness veils the world, 4 Warriors of Light shall come. If they cannot gather the shards of light, the darkness will consume all. The 4 crystals will never shine again. The king finishes the exposition dump and basically tells us where to go by saying how a crystal can be found on the continent to our north. We talk to Princess Sarah, and she rewards us by giving us her loot. Of course, it's not just any loot, but in fact an artifact passed down throughout the generations. The rest of the castle inhabitants thanks us, but nothing more of interest is gained from talking to them. After getting a good night's rest at the inn, we buy some supplies and head up to continue our journey north. A new day dawns and the narration begs us about the future of our journey. Of course, the important part here isn't the text or its details. Instead, it's about how this fantastic full-screen pixel art and masterful theme sets the tone and mood for the rest of our adventure. This Gigas firm is the first new monster we encounter on this side of the bridge, but they don't have any standout moves. However, in our next encounter, we battle against 3 of them alongside an ogre, making their existence troublesome nonetheless. The ogre isn't too special either, except for its massive attack. After the onslaught of multiple high damage attacks, Morgan is knocked out after the ogre is put down. The final Gigas worm doesn't go down without a struggle, and with its last breath deals 30 damage to Callie, knocking them out as well. We need to recover, but a pack of goblins and wolves ambush us on our way back. After failing to flee twice, Frank is also knocked out, leaving only Loris to trek back. We literally crossed the bridge like 5 minutes ago and the mobs are already beating our ass. No wonder the king kept the bridge burned. Now back in Cornelia, we stop at the chapel. Using a total of 120 gil, the priest brings all of the dead members back to life. Potions and magic being unable to heal HP once it's brought down to 0 makes Steph actually feel dangerous. Our second trip up is much smoother, and we enter Matoya's cave. We talk to this magic broom sweeping away. In the second text box, it says, Ino Lina Liknak, which is an incomprehensible phrase. But thanks to the broom's first line of dialogue, we know to read it backwards. Now it says, cancel and L1. We walk into the main room, and a lady in a red hat and dress keeps on bumping into objects as she reclaims how someone stole her eye. Not only are we unable to inquire how such a preposterous situation arose in the first place, we can't even ask who did it. Surely you can't have your eye stolen without at least first seeing the perpetrator. Even if they were masked, knowing the relative size and stature of the thief would be useful in our search for such object. After taking the 2 potions and singular antidote from the chest, we have nothing left to do here and leave. We encounter a lizard, and I only bring this up because if you ever see a lizard that ever looks like this, good luck. We continue west and cautiously make our way into Provoca due to the pirates at bay. Level 2 spells are now purchasable and cost only a measly 400 gil. Frank picks up Silence for now, as it's a debuff that hits all enemies. Loris purchases a broadsword from the weapon shop, and with it costing 550 gil, we're left with no money. On the left side of town, we notice a couple of eye-patched weirdos and decide to show them who the real pirates are. Big Boss Spike doesn't even enter the battle, sending his 9 lackeys instead. We were a bit hasty and should have visited the inn after all of the shopping, but although numerous, each of the pirates' attacks are weak on their own. Our battle prowess scared Vike, who is now experiencing a change of heart. In exchange for buckling down and improving the town, he gives us his ship, allowing us to sail the high seas. In town, we talk to this green-haired lady, and she tells us about how elves live across the sea, and how their prince has fallen into a deep slumber. Most of the other villagers just thank us for getting rid of the pirates. With the town now safe from the threat of the pirates, along with having obtained a ship, we are able to set sail towards our next destination. Unfortunately, the booty from our plunder was minuscule, thus we can only pick up a scimitar for Morgan. This leaves almost all the spells unpurchased, along with some additional pieces of armor. So before we move on, it's that time where we take our place as the apex predator on the food chain, and exterminate the local wildlife for money and experience. After stocking up and preparing for a journey, we set sail. Our first encounter on the high seas is against 2 sharks and some sort of fish/amphibian hybrid creature known as the Sahagin. Nothing exciting actually happens with these encounters here though. We land, but find ourselves next to Cornelia. According to the information we gathered earlier, we know that the Kingdom of Elves is surrounded by a forest, and the map confirms our trip will lead us south. This time, along with some Sahagins, we encounter some Gogglers. It is unclear to us why these fleshy, veiny, floating eyes live in the ocean, and we never receive an answer. The important part is that they have the ability to stun us. By paralyzing most of the party, they are able to just beat us down without any retaliation. Luckily for us, neither them nor the Sahagins are too tough on their own, so even though the length of this battle is extended, not much damage is truly dealt. We dock north of the forest before finding ourselves in Elfheim. Our first stop in a new town is obviously the inn, and it's here where we are now charged 100 gil per stay. The closest building is a dark magic shop, so we head on in. To my shock, each of the level 3 spells now cost 1500 gil each. This is 33% more gil than what we earned on our trip down here in the first place. The prices in the equipment shop are not much nicer either. Just one steel plate would cost us 800 pieces of gil. Weapons for the entire party is a little less costly, except for the giant mithril sword in the room. It was a little ridiculous saying one level 3 spell costing 1500 gil, but this sword cost 4000 gil by itself. To the north of the inn lie 3 gravestones. The far left one reads, "Here lies Erdrick." I didn't know who this was, but apparently this is in reference to Square's previous JRPG hero from Dragon Quest, and in some versions of the game, like the US NES version, the tombstone actually says, "Here lies Link." Reading too much into this, in the case of the Dragon Quest Zero, one interpretation could be how this is Square moving on from their previous game and putting everything they know into this supposedly final one. And in the case of Link being buried, you could read it as Square claiming that their game is even more ambitious, hoping to take the crown. Or if you wanted to be even more literal, we are in the Elven Kingdom and Link is an elf, so it's just could be a cute reference. Is it just a reference, or did some developer intend for it to have some deeper meaning behind it? Who knows? It doesn't really matter in the first place, but its ambiguity does leave enough room for a mystery, even if there isn't any, which I suppose only adds to this game's legendary status. We cross this tiny bridge and enter another white magic shop. This time, talking to the shopkeeper reveals the level 4 spells, with each one now costing a measly 4k gil each. Yeah. It's also interesting to note that the level 3 and 4 shops are in the same location. To me, this indicates that we're going to be spending a rather large amount of time here in Elfheim. After having explored all of the town, we wander into the Elven Castle. On the leftern outskirts, an elf informs us of a witch named Matoya who can brew any potion we think of. This is probably the same Matoya we already visited. In the northeast quadrant, an elf informs us of some dwarves living in a cave on the western edge of the Aldean Sea and calls them a friendly bunch. This gives us insight into the relationship between the two species. Near the entrance, this elf tells us how the Dark Elf King, Astos, broke into the castle and placed a curse upon the Elf Prince before leaving with riches in store. The Elven Guards mention how the Elven Prince is fast asleep and his condition is confirmed by the healer, who informs us of how this has been an ongoing problem for the past 5 years. Even the town sages have no useful information as the time is not yet right. Piecing the clues together, we need to return to Matoya with her crystal eye so she can concoct us a potion to wake the Elf Prince from his slumber. The only leads we have for a crystal eye are the Dark Elf King, Astos, and the dwarves. I guess it's time to go dig a hole. We take a short trip across the sea and head into Mount Duragar. Literally, the second dwarf we talk to brings up how the Dark Elf Astos nicked Matoya's crystal eye. I sure am glad that this random dwarf knows this critical piece of information and just randomly talks about it to a group of strangers he's never seen before, just like the elves that we met in Elfheim. We also learn of how the earth began to rot starting in the west. A little bit to the south, we talk to a dwarf looking for a levistone, a material that makes things float in the air. We, of course, take note of this. In this little resting area, this dwarf informs us of how there might be some nitro powder left in some castle storerooms. Fair enough. We talk to Smith and learn that he is in search of a legendary material, adamantite. Upon acquiring such a material, he would be willing to craft the most magical of swords. Neelik lies all the way to the south of the cave. He's close to opening up the canal and only needs a bit of nitro powder to blow up the rock blocking the way. Although we didn't gain anything of immediate value besides some gil, we did gain some important piece of information and have multiple reasons to return back to this location. The task at hand now is to find the Dark Elf Astos. From Cornelia, we make our way west and enter the Western Keep. We talk to the king, and he reveals how he was struck by Astos, the king of Dark Elves. If he is able to retrieve his crown from the Marsh Cave, he will be able to restore his castle, and of course ends by asking us to fetch said item. With this, we finally have a lead, but before making the journey, we spend some time to prepare. The trek west isn't difficult, but with all of the encounters, it becomes tedious and slowly whittles away at our resources. So once we enter the dungeon, we will have less than what we started with, which brings us to the main gameplay loop. At its core, Final Fantasy is a resource management game. Outside of the bosses, all of our encounters are versus random packs of trash mobs. None of them are ever all too dangerous outside of the exceptions, but all of their attacks do take a toll on your resources, whether they be potions or the white mage's spell slots to restore your HP, or the black mage's spell slots which can wipe out entire troops at a time. A simple yet deep-ish system. We enter the Marsh Cave and are greeted by a bat that cries Kree. The greenstone, along with the mossy floor and heavy fog, creates an unsettling atmosphere. Our first encounter against shadows only helps us sink in the mood. Good thing when a Frank's DL1 takes him out. The next fight is against two green slimes. They poison Loris with their attacks, but that information was not as important as discovering the resistance to physical attacks. Callie exploits this weakness, killing the second green slime, but I continue with the physical assault in order to find a better approximation of where the hit point limit of the green slime is. Unfortunately, we find ourselves meeting a dead end. After encountering the second group of green slimes, some spiders, and more shadows, I realized that my preparations had major gaps in it, and thus I make the journey back to Elfheim. We enter the Marsh Cave this time, actually prepared, and head south. After going through a few antidotes, we make our way to the second floor. As the party continues to vanquish foes through the first major dungeon, I am presented with the opportunity to discuss some problems with the Marsh Cave and some of the other dungeons in the game. A big one that plagues a good number of dungeons is that the designs of the maps themselves are just not interesting to navigate through. The remastered visuals help to make dungeons look nice, but since I'm mentioning it, it's a much cheaper issue. The question of what makes a dungeon good is also a rather difficult one, as even seemingly minor mechanical choices can have major effects. Should the dungeons include puzzles? Should they be open and straightforward, or should they be mazes full of winding paths and dead ends? I mean, the obvious answer is it depends and probably should be a mix of both, but that only leads me to ask, why does it depend in the first place? To me, a well-designed dungeon should convey a story. We should know why we're delving these depths and what makes this location special. We should know why this location exists and what purpose it serves. Each room on each floor should fulfill a greater purpose that contributes to the whole map. This is still vague, but focuses on the heart of the matter. We explored the Marsh Cave, but it's not really exploring. We're just searching for a ladder or a treasure room if they exist. There isn't anything else to see or do aside from the battles, which leads into another issue. Gameplay-wise, random encounters are not really a problem if used well, and narrative-wise, they also make sense since we are treading into a quite dangerous dungeon. However, a contributing factor to this is how the encounters are infinite. This, along with no pauses, causes issues that manifest as pacing problems. And if the point is to drain you of your resources and make you feel like you're in danger, having no direct measurement of the progression done makes enemies stop feeling like a threat and instead more of an annoyance to skip through. This only makes the open layout worse as it makes traversal feel like it's a waste of time. This is why the flee option exists as well. Imagine if you fight every battle. That would have been a tragedy. Oh, and worry not, because I do realize that a large part of these issues almost certainly came due to the technical and budget limitations present at the time of development. However, even with this understanding, the issue itself doesn't just magically go away. Without completely changing the entire game systems themselves, I think a quick band-aid fix to this would be to disable random encounters in the treasure rooms. Having this short rest where the players know they won't have to fight is just barely enough of a break in detention, and it allows the players to not only reset their party, but also their mental state and expectations. Alas, who could have anticipated that a revolutionary game for a still emerging medium at the time could have design flaws? After collecting all of the treasure on the second floor, we actually end up heading back up to the surface to use a cottage. We're running dangerously low on potions, but more importantly, spell slots. The initial rush of the dungeon diving faded away, leaving only annoyance in its place as the descent down this time involves a lot of running away from battles. Statues or tombstones surround this chest, which is a nice visual indicator of the dangerous encounter that lies ahead. We open their chest and are ambushed by Pisco demons, for some reason. I'm not sure why these mind flayer / aberration type creatures are down here in the Marsh Cave, alongside shades, undead, cockatrices, and other random assortment of enemies. I guess it's Underdark-ish related, but it's never really explained in game. After the first volley of attacks from the Pisco demons, Morgan attacks, but is dropped down to 13 HP. This chip damage allows Callie's Bolt 2 to take out the two in the middle. Loris tanks the rest of the damage, and before Morgan is even healed, the Pisco demons are put down. With this, we have obtained the crown and now need to head all the way back up. While annoying due to the issues present, I do want to clarify the fact that I very much so respect this design decision. Having to climb back out with minimal resources really helps us sell the dungeoneering fantasy in both making sure that you are prepared and in making sure that dungeons are deadly. The design of how limited your resources are indicates to me that the developers did not even want the players to clear through everything in just one go. I would even go so far as using the fact that there are treasure rooms locked behind the mystic key to support this idea. Coming back when you can one-shot every enemy to collect all the treasure helps with expanding the game's length and adds to the power fantasy of your characters having grown stronger. Unfortunately, the major issue with this design choice is that the way back up is the same as the way back down, and thus consists of nothing more than spamming the flee action because the battles were no longer difficult or interesting. After healing up upon our return to Elfheim, we use our guild to replenish our supplies and purchase new equipment, weapons, and spells. Back at the Western Keep, we avoid all the screeching bats and talk to the king. He laughs maniacally and reveals to us that we were tricked, and he is Astos himself. The first turn is a standard boss setup where we start off by buffing the tank. Astos casts Slow 2 on Morgan, Frank's second invisible 1 ends up going to Callie first because keeping our magic DPS alive is pretty important. Haste also now lets Loris hit 4 times with just 1 attack. Astos goes in for Fire 2 this time, and it deals almost 400 damage total across the entire party. This leaves Callie at just 31 HP, but that doesn't matter as Loris takes Astos out. Upon victory, we obtain Matoya's Crystal Eye. Astos was not too difficult, but we lucked out a bit with him only casting Slow 2 on Morgan the first turn. And as much as it pains me to say it, Morgan, at least right now, is by far the weakest member of our party. Giving the thief no special abilities is a really baffling design decision. Even if programming a steal skill was not a possibility at the time, spell slots still exist, and something should have been done with them with this class. I think letting them learn the invisible and silence debuffs at the very least makes sense thematically, and would make the class more useful. After sailing for far too long, we talk to Matoya and give her back her eye. Although disappointed in how unattractive we are, she still rewards us with 1 Jolt Tonic. We sail back to Elfheim and now give the healer our Jolt Tonic. The Elf Prince wakes up from his terrible nightmare and recognizes us as the legendary warriors of the prophecy. He gives us the Mystic Key that was ours to begin with, and with this, we can now obtain the castle's treasures. But it doesn't end just there, as a significant amount of previous locations we visited before had rooms which could only be unlocked by the Mystic Key. Cornelia is important because along with some gil and equipment, we obtained the Nitro Powder. The Temple of Chaos only has some nice swords. Oh, and since I'm in this area, I decided to check out one of the most well-known bugs of this game, and that is the Peninsula of Power. This feature is a glitch that occurs because the 2 tiles are extended far enough that their encounter map is changed. This was removed in the Pixel Remasters because the game was built entirely on the Unity game engine and is only present right now thanks to the Origin rebalancing mod, adding this feature back in. Honestly, it is a bit disappointing that this bug didn't become an official feature in the remasters, because overall it's pretty harmless. If a player wanted to grind and become overleveled, there isn't anything stopping them from doing so in the first place. In fact, that playstyle is kind of encouraged. Having this small spot would at least help with speeding up that progress, and is so far out of the way that if a player didn't know this existed, it is unlikely they would have figured out by themselves. Our first encounter is against a troop of 4 Hill Gigas. As expected, they are much stronger than any basic enemies we've encountered thus far, and can not only dish out the damage, but take it as well. I wouldn't call the battle difficult or interesting though, as the majority of Hill Gigas turns consisted of basic attacks. We were rewarded with over 3,000 gil and XP each, which leads to level up for Loris and Frank, with Morgan and Callie just 137 XP behind. After a short detour, we sail over to the Dwarf Cave. This treasure room is actually a room filled with treasure for once, with the Worm Killer and Mythical Armor being the standout in this group. After equipping ourselves, we talk to Nelik and give him our Nitro Powder, so we can open the Western Canal. However, our work is not yet done. At Assos Western Keep, we raid his treasure room. The mill chest is trapped and filled with 6 rates. A simple DO2 takes care of them and earns us a falchion. The top right and left chests are filled with mummies. 1 DO2 should take care of them, but a Fire 2 and Q never hurt. From the right, we earn a pair of steel gloves, and from the gloves are a nice upgrade, but the power staff is useless outside of selling for the small amount of 6,172 gil. We return to the Marsh Cave, but outside of Astos, we haven't faced any other big threat, so most of our upgrades are our new spells and equipment. The trip down is less difficult, but still tedious because while we are stronger, we haven't passed that damage threshold for this area. I'm not surprised that this is the case, but returning this soon dampens the feeling of how much progression you should have made during all the time we spent traveling. This group of Pisco demons ends up killing Frank before we get rid of them. Our reward of a mithril knife for Callie isn't even good because we aren't using our melee attacks with them in the first place. The silver amulet is a nice pickup though. This third room trolls us by including nothing but some statues. Very cool. The final treasure room is also pretty worthless because it's just 1,000 gil, making the trip down here a complete waste of time. The problem is that we didn't earn anything worthwhile or unique, this time that we couldn't have just earned from grinding trash mobs outside of Elfheim. We pass through the Western Canal and enter Melmond. Talking to the townsfolk reveals a ton of new plot points. This includes the Earth Crystal, which is causing light to decay because of the vampire that recently attacked town, who is blocking the flow of its power. For some solid advice, Sada, the sage, lives down south in Titan's Tunnel, and that Titan likes shiny gems. The shops are bare, but the equipment store has a shock of the knight's armor price. It costs a cool 45,000 gil, just slightly over double the amount of gil we have right now. We also gain access to the level 5 spells, which now cost 8,000 gil each. Yet another major money sink. Now that we finished shopping, it's time to slay a vampire. Just kidding, we found the Titan's Cave first. We speak to it, and it says, "You shall not pass." An obvious reference towards one of the game's major influences. We actually entered a Terra Cavern this time. The map reveals the many winding tunnels carved into the loamy environment. Already went over dungeon design during the Marsh Cave, and I don't have much to add as this dungeon doesn't add much itself either. I suppose I could go over the different enemies I encountered, but nothing about the comment has changed either. All the way down here, on the 3rd floor, we encounter the vampire. All things in this world are indeed destined to end in death, and that includes the vampire itself. Turn 1 consists of the standard buffs, but the vampire acts first, casting Glaze to paralyze Loris. Morgan gets in, but the vampire regains health every turn. Frank misses silence a few times. Callie casts Fire 2 and burns the vampire's soul for a destructive attack. Unfortunately, due to the trek down here, our spell slots are all used up, leaving us too weak to deal with the threat. Thus, we end with our character dying. Loading up one quick save later, we overwrite reality and fight the vampire for the first time. Even though it wasn't, it might as well have been since I forgot to heal party before the fight. My bad. Regardless, the setup for the first turn is as standard as possible. However, this time Frank spammed DA2 instead of silence. Debuffs are another problem with combat in this game, and it's that they suck and are complete garbage. They just don't hit at all, they don't do anything, they're just bad. Can't really expand on that. After our victory, we open the chest and obtain a star ruby to feed the Titan. We still have a small tunnel to explore, which ends up leading to a mysterious stone slab resonating an evil force. Yes, we have to now leave the dungeon only to return to go even deeper. This is one of the worst use cases for backtracking, as nothing is added to the experience. This is just pure padding. We talk to the Titan and it somehow knows that we have the star ruby on us. The Titan devours the star ruby and phases through the walls, which grants us access to the rest of the cave. The first room behind a door is full of urns, but none of them are interactable. Heading further in, we meet Sada. He knows we defeated the vampire, but reveals that the real threat lurks much deeper below. In order to assist us, he gives us the Earth Rod, which can break the seal. I spend a little time grinding in order to prepare for descent back down. We discover the entity disturbing the peace all the way down on the 5th floor. The Fiend of Earth feasts upon the Earth Crystal, only stopping once we disturb it. The Lich reveals itself, and thus the battle begins. The Lich does not play around and starts off with an Ice 2, dealing over 500 damage across the board in just one attack. Frank's near Dia 3 puts in the work, healing 200 damage with just a single move. After a heal, Loris with haste pressures the Lich with his massive swings. In fact, the Fury of Blows confuse the Lich because it doesn't retaliate in an effective manner. This allows us to heal the damage before the massive hits from the Lich can knock any of our party members out. This snowballs into our victory. I wish I could discuss these battles more, but if even bosses are unable to make debuffs work, there's no chance for our mages to do so. That's how bad they are, and thus fights are just spam your high damage attacks in order. I forgive this game for making this mistake, but wow, this really still is an issue, huh? Anyway, with the Earth Crystal no longer suppressed, it can begin repairing the Earth, and we leave. Luckily, even the developers realized that trying to climb back out under these circumstances was a mountain too tedious for most to climb, and they provided us with a nice warp out. Still, if you wish to ascend back off the normal way, you can, although I don't know what the point in doing so would even be. The developers even started making some of the spells warps because they realized trekking back up would become an issue. We head back to Melman and rest. Our next step is to collect information, which leads us to talking to every NPC in town. Not much new is learned though. However, we do talk to Dr. Un. We've never heard of him, but apparently there's nothing a genius like him cannot do. Cornelia is one of the locations we return to. Here, we discover an unnamed sage who reveals 2 pieces of important information. The first is that Sage Lucan relocated to the Crescent Lake, and the second is that once we gain access to a canoe, we can cross rivers. On a related note, sailing is a miserable experience. The enemies started off strong, but by now, every encounter just brings me that much closer to the horizon. Crescent Lake is an aesthetically pleasing town, but it's still a town in Final Fantasy, and so I will skip over all of the typical town activities as nothing has changed from the several times I've gone over them in the past. In the forest clearing located east of the town square, 12 white-bearded men formed the Circle of Sages. The 12 sages were guided to this land by the stars and prophecy. 4 great crystals exist in this world: fire, earth, water, and wind. The forces that compose the world. However, the light that once shone within them has been lost as the Fiends of Chaos have used its power for their own gain. The Fiend of Wind first appeared 400 years ago. The Fiend of Water followed 200 years after. Just the 2 of them managed to lay waste and ruin the entire northern continent. To the west of the Crescent Lake lies the Fiend of Fire. Our victory over the Lich forced the change in our plans, as she is now awake 200 years before her time. It is only once we defeat the 3 other fiends that the truth shall reveal itself. Right here, where the sages are gathered. In order to aid us, we are given a canoe. And finally, at long last, we meet Sage Lucan. However, the prophet himself is still consumed by the events of the future. The winding maze, like rivers, carved far too many twists and turns into the weathered terrain, but we still manage to find our way to Mount Gulg. It's here that a new mechanic is added to the dungeon, and it's a classic. Lava oozes out of the cracks in the earth and floods large sections of each floor. Each step now becomes an important decision, as the slow burn of taking tick damage from walking on the lava itself is introduced. Although it won't kill you, there won't be a random encounter on that tile. This adds a little minigame inside the simple choices while traversing. Should you try to get that one last treasure chest by taking a confirmed amount of damage through the lava tiles, or take no damage but risk the random encounter, which could result in something much worse. This is a nice addition of some spice into the dish. On the 5th floor, we open this chest and are jump scared by a red dragon. This enemy in particular initiated an amusing challenge. As expected from a dragon, it dealt an absurd amount of damage when it attacked with its blazing breath, but its tough scales refused to shatter, soaking up far too much damage. I admit I needed to reset twice here, and even upon victory, our resources were low enough that I was worried about the Fire Fiend's strength taking us out. It isn't as if we have any other choice that matters though, and thus we initiate the encounter against the spirit. Merilith reveals herself. Unfortunately, we didn't do so hot on our first try, but through the hellfire and flames, we must carry on. Morgan falls first, and Frank follows. Loris is the MVP with his buffs, but Callie is only behind because we're still limited with too few high-level spell slots. They end up felling the Fiend, and with that, we've rescued the Fire Crystal. At the Crescent Lake, we find a blue-haired man standing next to 2 gravestones. We talk to him and discover he's been after the Levistone for over 10 years, but more importantly, there's a cave to the north of here that he finds promising. The Ice Cavern is quite a bit less treacherous than Mount Gold due to our increased strength. The maps also include shattered ice tiles, which are just reskinned lava tiles. Reskinning stuff is fine, but doing so in the very next dungeon feels a bit wrong. Maybe at least wait 1 dungeon before reintroducing reskin mechanics. And I mean, they've already included another map mechanic with these cracked floor tiles. Stepping on them breaks them and forces us to fall down the floor. This mechanic already adds that unique factor to this map and should have been used more. With the Levistone in front of us, we attempt to grab it, however, an evil eye interrupts us. Frank now has access to Invisible too, and since it applies the evasion boost to every party member, the difficulty of boss fights drops considerably. If a boss can't cast multiple AoE spells in a row, they become nothing more than just cannon fodder. The placement of the cracks force us to fall down another floor before being able to obtain the items in the treasure chest. It's blatant in force here, but the idea is there. The dark wizards guarding the chest end up being much stronger than the evil eye itself and end up felling Frank. And to top things off, all of the effort was just for a shirt. Amazing. We end up back at Elfheim after the sages receive their vision. By the power of the Levistone, a great sail rises into the sky from the sand sea below the crescent. With the location known, we end up with the airship sooner rather than later. Now airborne, we gain access to not just the northern continent, but the entire map. However, not every location is easy to access. Gaia is where we enter first, as it's the only new location that we can land our airship directly next to. Of course, there is the standard new equipment, but only the new bracelets make any economical sense. The level 7 cells available are nice, but obscene in their price for now. The most important part of this town are its NPCs and the information they carry. This lady is important because she mentions how the fairy living at the Gaia Spring has gone missing. The man directly below her gives us a separate piece of information about a castle in the west which tests the courage of its adventurers. Exploring the northern reaches, we stumble across an archipelago with each island having a hole dug in them. We enter each hole and learn that they are all part of the Dragon's Cave. Exploring each entrance grants us with some epic loot. Talking to the dragon inside reveals small tidbits of lore about the previous state of the kingdom. In the island with 2 holes lies Bahamut, the Dragon King. Once we return to him with a token of our courage, he will knight us. An appropriate reward. This leads us to the castle in the west. The castle has no land that we can drop down on nearby, forcing us to land much further away and traverse the surrounding area before we can reach it. Inside the castle, a sage stands in the middle. He informs us that our courage will be put to the test, which we already knew, but whatever. We enter the northeastern room and sit on the throne. This teleports us to the 2nd floor, which is a teleporter puzzle with random encounters. It's exactly as bad as you would expect. The first power equipment we receive are the gauntlets. These cast Lightning 2 for free, which is crazy powerful. This chest contains a healing staff, which is nice because it's just a staff that casts heal, so that's also pretty good. Not long after, we require the rat's tail and have to face off against 2 zombie dragons. Not that they are much of a challenge. We enter Bahamut's lair, rat tailed in hand, and present our trophy. After a moment of consideration, Bahamut believes that our bravery is indeed worthy of celebration, especially since this is an event that has not happened in many years. The King of Dragon grants our party magnificent boons by upgrading our classes. Most of them receive general stat boosts to their base values, but there is more to it. The fighter transforms into a knight and is now allowed to learn and use level 1, 2, and 3 white magic spells, although they only have 1 spell slot to use them each. Our thief becomes a ninja, and this grants them access to most of the tier 0 weapons. They can also use black magic from level 1 to 4 with a good amount of spell slots. The thief should have had access to level 1 and 2 spells from the start before gaining the other 2 levels. This would have made the progression smoother by making the thief just less bad. Our mages have the least impressive upgrade. Although rizzed up in some new fancy robes, the only upgrade they really gain is the ability to cast the highest level of spells. I'm not sure what I expected for these classes, but it's a bit underwhelming. Maybe if more spells were locked behind this class change, it could mean more, but to be honest, it's kind of whatever at this point. Unlock is our next stop, and this town also requires us to land a small distance away from it. Here, we pick up some important pieces of information. The first takes us to a caravan in the desert. For 50,000 gil, the mysterious stranger sells us a fairy in the bottle. After purchasing the fairy, his stock switches to some tonics, none of which are any good, but at least we got what we came here for. We return to Gaia and set the fairy free. We talked to her at a spring, and she gives us some oxyale from the bottom of the pool in return. Unlock's other feature is this woman and her barrel. With oxyale now in hand, she recognizes us as the savior of her people, the mermaids. She floats down into the sea. We, of course, enter the barrel and follow her, letting the undertow drag us down. Sinking down into the sunken shrine, we end up starting our journey on floor 3 this time. The enemies down here are all ocean themed like one would expect, but I don't think, I would say, any of them stand out in particular. After collecting the treasure on this floor, we are left with 2 choices. The western stairs will take us down, and easters will take us up. For now, up is where we will head. The 4th floor has 1 treasure room with nothing in it. Very cool. This second part of the 3rd floor has 2 chests with a pitiful amount of gil. Stairs take us back down. The 2nd floor then takes us down to the 1st floor, and it's here where the Kraken lies, but we will return to fight this fiend a little bit later on. We take the other set of stairs on floor 3 and end up on the 5th floor. This floor has no encounters, but instead is where the Kraken holds the mermaids captive. The final top right treasure room is the only one that's confusing and a bit tricky to reach. This is where a little bit of mapping creativity finally kicks in. It requires you to loop around the other side. Cute, and we are rewarded with the Rosetta Stone for our troubles. With the mermaids free, we head back down and face the Kraken. At this point in the game, our party is ridiculously strong, especially against single enemies. Still, this fight manages to not be a complete cakewalk, even if the challenge is choosing to heal or do damage. In any case, we end up defeating the Kraken on our first attempt and free the Crystal of Water. I hope you remember the famous Dr. On, because we return back to him in Mermaids. We talk to him and give him the Rosetta Stone. This allows him to decipher Levitating, the language of the Sky People. And of course, we are able to learn it too. How? I don't know. Magic, I guess. In any case, with this new language learned, we have a new location to visit as well. Enter Lufenia. The first man we talk to informs us that the Lufenians are actually descendants of the race that once lived among the clouds instead. An important distinction. He also tells us that their ancestor, Sid, was the one who built the airship we travel with. The rest of the townsfolk fill us in on some of the background details of their people and of the castle in the sky. The mystery of the tower in the desert is also solved as this man gives us a bell, allowing us to enter said tower. The design of the maps in here actually fit with the theme of a tower with their outer and inner circular layers. On the 2nd floor, we encounter a golem who drops hints of its friends, leaving on a journey west. With them, they took the warp cube, going to see their master. On the top floor, the other golem confirms that the warp cube will allow us to travel to the sky. Looks like we have to head west. Our journey takes us into the waterfall cavern. The golem has been waiting for us this entire time and gives us the item we needed, asking us to defeat Tiamat in her flying fortress. With the warp cube now in hand, we ascend. The floors that make up the castle in the sky are all pretty straightforward in design, and this makes the climb up infinitely less tedious compared to other dungeons. Except for the 4th floor. For some reason, this one is empty and loops endlessly in every direction. I like the concept, but this floor makes no sense in why it exists here in this dungeon in particular. It doesn't take long, but we eventually reach the 5th floor, and it is here where we must face one of the most dangerous foes to have ever existed. Oh, and there's also Tiamat, the Fiend of Wind. I don't know why I discounted her, because she is dangerous, and her multi-headed attack and dragon breaths tear us apart. However, we are able to win the grind game and slay the dragon to free the 4th and final crystal. Our stay in the castle in the sky isn't over yet though, because, like I alluded to earlier, there is one other uber powerful enemy in this game, and that is the Wormek. It's left unclear to us to why this enemy exists in the first place, and why that existence is then further limited to only this thin strip which leads up to the dragon. But even if it is left unclear, it only matters if we can encounter the damn thing. The Origins rebalance mod drops the encounter rate down to a horrifying 1.4%. Of course, that's only half the battle, because now we have to kill it, which proves just as difficult because we get nuked. I sure do wonder what this could be in reference to. Truly a mystery for the ages. Encountering the Wormek took a few hours, and in that time, our party gained more than a couple of levels, which helped our situation out in reducing the difficulty. I wish it was easier to fight the Wormek without all of the bonus levels, but now since we're so strong, fleeing is inferior in speed over killing the enemies. This fight was difficult, and because of that, it was actually quite enjoyable. Each of the Wormek's attacks are either AoE nukes, which destroy our entire party, or focus laser beams to disintegrate one specific member. This high attack damage, along with its absurd HP pool, and the ability to regain 200 HP every turn as sustain, makes this probably the hardest enemy in the game. On our defense, Frank stacks up some defense buffs with Shield 2, This helps to soften some of the damage from the nuke attack, because, it's a nuke. Morgan just ends up being the buff bot for Loris, and stacks up the attack buffs after a haste. This allows Loris to deal over 1000 damage with some attacks. Kelly just does damage like a good block mage. The Warmech doesn't nuke us too much, and that actually allows us to secure our victory. Now, with all 4 crystals safe, we can head to the center of the world where all the crystals converge, and that location is the Temple of Chaos. We talk to the bats inside the Temple of Chaos after learning they are transformed members of the race of the Sky People and manage to collect some small bits of trivia. With nothing else to learn, we finally focus the light of the 4 elemental crystals onto the black crystal in the middle of the room. Their power erupts and sends us 2,000 years back into the past, to the beginning of the time loop. Don't think about the time loop concept too much, because the game doesn't worry about it either. We just have to deal with this insane plot revelation right now. The Temple of Chaos from 2,000 years ago is infinitely grander in vision than the one belonging to the future that was previously our present. Map-wise, there aren't any brand new mechanics that freshen anything up. Even the treasures are scant and few and far between. The most important part of the Temple of Chaos is that we must rebattle the past versions of the elemental fiends. However, after the harrowing experience that was the Warmech, they no longer possess much of a challenge, even if they are stronger. In a game based around resource management, we end up with too many resources, making the managing part trivial. At long last, we re-encounter Garland. He reveals to us that the 4 great forces saved him by sending him back in time. Once here, he sent the 4 fiends into the future. In turn, they will once again send him back into the past. In 2,000 years, Garland will remember none of this, but he will be reborn, defeating us over and over again, endlessly. This completes his transformation into Chaos, and it's up to us to finally defeat him. The battle starts off with a whimper, as everything is fairly standard from both sides. Chaos's regular attack lands, and it even stuns Loris, requiring Morgan to use a remedy on him next turn. Don't worry though, because turn 2 is much more insane. This time, Chaos causes an earthquake, and without any ribbons equipped, instant kills both Loris and Morgan. Frank and Callie survive this and the following blaze attack, which gives our White Magician the chance to cast Life 2 on Loris this turn, and Morgan the next. Chaos is having none of this though, as the earlier earthquake brings in a tsunami to drown Callie. Frank survives with just 23 HP, and manages to get the heal, and then revive off. Now in healthy position, we go dark, continuing the assault. With the final level 8 spell slot, Callie casts the final instance of Flare, and finishes Chaos. And just as suddenly as we cast our lot into the world, we are taken away as the time loop is severed. The endless struggle that raged over 2,000 years had ended, and peace prevailed once more. It was but a mere trick of fate that gave rise to the chain of Garland's wrath, but the 4 forces meant to guide the world magnified the event, giving birth to the fiends, and allowed monsters to run rampant as the world sank into darkness. However, all of that is now in the past. The 4 forces now flow as they were meant, and we prepare to cross time once more, returning to a known world where Princess Sarah, Queen Jane, and even Garland await as the fateful day that spent time spiraling into a loop remains an unknown. No one in that world will ever recall the struggle of the 4 Warriors of Light, as breaking the chain means that its events never existed. But within the tales of fantasy that people tell, their memory lives on, and now their return is upon us. With the memory of their struggle buried deep in their hearts, they will quietly watch over our world. Always remember that the forces of the world must be used as they were intended, that the power of light must never be used for dark, and that the true crystals reside in your heart. For you are the warrior who crossed time. You are the bringer of light. Yeah, I understand what they were going for with this ending, but this is not it, or perhaps no longer it in this day and age. This isn't to say that it's bad, it's just boring. Breaking the 4th wall just to end on the sappiest note is kinda lame, and besides the final text scroll, Garland bringing up time loops is never discussed with any amount of detail or even foreshadowed. Time travel is always a disaster in the best of scenarios, but here it's so unnecessary. Why did the forces send Garland back in time? How did Garland even survive during his time? How did he send the fiends back into the future? Why do the Warriors of Light even return to the future as in their own? If the past that they came from doesn't exist, why do they continue to exist? If they live, it's no longer even a Final Fantasy. The list of questions goes on and on, but I guess I have to ask myself, does any of that really matter? And I'd have to say, not really, because even though this is Final Fantasy, the game's focus was never really on the story in the first place. It was always on the gameplay mechanics. In the early levels, the tough back and forth interactions felt good in combat, but as we gained strength, the combat itself never really evolved. Sure, we gained new spells and equipment, but all of this just translated some numbers changing, which confirms my suspicions from the intro. Final Fantasy is a dungeon-crawling fantasy experience with graphics, music, story, player interaction, and most importantly, you're able to enjoy this unique experience without the need for a dungeon master or other players. For something that released in 1987, it's no wonder that this game found the success it needed to in order to evolve into the media franchise it is today. That's it for my conclusion. This was an interesting one to play and analyze. Well, I say analyze, but this is really just a glorified plot summary due to the repetitive nature of combat influencing my commentary. And TBH, this entire series is kind of a glorified plot summary series. Hopefully I will be able to develop my skills and play games that allow for more analysis sections in the future. Still, if you have feedback, constructive criticism, or think I missed something, which you would be correct about, please leave a comment down below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate if you hit that like button, then possibly share it with your friends. And at that point, you might as well subscribe. Good night.